Hello everyone, this is the video commentary for Motioncast Animation Pack number 11, Classic 3D Survival Horror. I'd already made a video like this for the release of the 1.0 version of the pack, but the update being quite massive, there's a lot more to say. First of all, I'd like to apologize for taking so long to release this update, but you should know that we started working on this update at the end of 2023. At that point, there hadn't been many sales of this pack, but at the beginning of 2024, sales of this pack really exploded. I took into account all the feedback, all the criticisms, and so in addition to the new animations that I wanted to add, I also had to adjust certain things, make idles into loops, etc. That's why it took longer than expected. I also let myself be a bit overwhelmed by my ambitions. Because we recorded so many animations, I realized afterwards that just for this update, there are almost as many animations as on all my first 15 products, i.e. 960. I think we are even over 1,000, if you count the loops and the animations where the character turns on itself, which are the only ones that aren't original animations. There's something I really wanted to talk about. The file nomenclature has changed. In other words, the way in which the files are sorted has been completely overhauled. One of the things that was criticized in version 1.0 was how the files were arranged. There were 240 files, and I put all the animations in the same folder, which I admit wasn't very clever. Now, I've done things completely differently. Each folder corresponds to a weapon, meaning that all the animations of the character without weapons are in one folder. All the animations with the character with only the submachine gun are another folder. All the animations with only the rifle, another folder, and so on and so on. Each file starts with a number, and each number corresponds to a category. For example, if the file starts with a 1 or a 2, it's an idle animation, because I wanted to maintain continuity with what was done in version 1.0. Animations number 2 are either idles, but in 4 directions, or idles that loops, which I've called idle shorts. I'd just like to stay for 2 seconds on the nomenclature to point out that the new file numbering has changed compared to the previous version. It's been changed because I've added new animations such as dashes, quick turns, backward walks, and other things that give you maximum malleability when it comes to moving the character. Of course, there were a lot of extra numbers to add, but I still wanted to keep a certain logic. If you start with the idle, then you have everything that's reloaded and fired or hit with weapons. Then there's everything that has to do with moving the character, and then you'll find the more specific interactions, picking up an object, activating a lever, getting into a tight spot, opening a door, and so on. The last animations, number 29, are all about healing with injections, bandages, Resident Evil 5 style spray. You get the idea. Fittingly, at the very end are the death animations. I've gone more into detail in the documentation that comes with the animation pack. In addition to this documentation, there's a PDF with a single page field naming guide, which is, as the name suggests, a guide of the names of the files. This PDF tells you what each number corresponds to. I suggest to keep this PDF next to you when you're working on this pack. There are about 30 categories, including, for example, number 14, where there are several things going on at the same time. Opening a door, pushing an object, anything that involves going over an obstacle. Some ideas came up to me when I was already working on the animation exports, such as going through narrow passages. That was an idea I had while playing Resident Evil Outbreak, and I thought it would be nice to integrate it, except that I'd already started working on the animations and exporting the files with an already established nomenclature. So I had to put them in a number that was already there, because otherwise I'd have had to rename all the files, including those already made. That would have meant another day of work for nothing. That's why there are several things in number 14. I'd also like to point out that all the animations already present in 1.0 have been revisited and optimized. Some people complained that the animations were too slow, so I fixed that. This update now includes our version 2.0 dummy, the one that appeared in pack number 16, the first pack in volume 2. On Blender or Unity, many people are used to working with a root bone in 3D animation. This is the bone that gives the character a global location. In other words, the bone will remain constantly under the character's hips and follow him all the time. This is also the case for the animations in the 1.0 only folder. Next, I wanted to come back briefly to the idea I had when I originally made this animation pack. When I started this activity back in 2021, there was already a revival of old-style survival horror. I remembered that in this type of game, there's no in-game interface, and the state of health was communicated through the character's animation, at least from Resident Evil 2 onwards. In the first Resident Evil, you didn't see the character with his hand on his shoulder to indicate that he's taken damage. You have to see their state of health on the menu. Carrier on Dreamcast, for example, is close to what I'd had in mind with this pack. For that game, they redesigned the animations according to the state of health. There were 3 states of health depending on the damage you took, like the slow animation when you've been hurt. In relation to that, I'd also like to come back to how the files are structured. HS stands for health status, so HSA corresponds to animations in top form. HSB is when he's taken some damage, and HSC is when he's taken a lot of damage. So HSB will be more or less the same animation, but a little slower, and HSC will be much slower. You should know that in 1.0, on the animation file, it was written health status in full. We've abbreviated that to HS so that we can have shorter file names. Having file names that were too long could sometimes cause problems with certain software. You should also know that when we recorded the animations in 1.0 in 2021, we had already recorded animations for the rocket launcher that we wanted to include in this pack. Here, you can see the images from the 2021 mocap, but at that time we were using Ipsoft, and there was a little problem with IPI soft when you use Kinex, which are cameras that detect depth. If you have a heavy object next to you, a massive object, the beams are lost and can no longer track the body. Now we've changed our mocap system, we've switched to Rococo. In reality, there are still animations that were made with IPI soft, but we mainly use the Rococo suit. The rocket launcher isn't the only weapon we've added in this update. Each of these new weapons has the same animation category, but with a few atypical variations. Some animations were remade from scratch, like the walk and runs, because at the time we were really limited by the capture space. I'd also like to point out that I've made a video where you can see all these animations called Close Look. I urge everyone to watch this video before buying. That way you'll see if the animations suit you, if there's what you're looking for, and if there's what you need for your project. One last aspect I wanted to talk about, the staircase animations. We originally did everything with Rococo, but I quickly realized that the staircase animations with Rococo were unusable because the more walls there were between the computer, the router, and the suit, the less the suit worked. It's very difficult in a staircase to have your computer and router in the same room. In any case, with Rococo, you can only make stairs go up, whereas with Episoft, you're supposed to have a calculated ground level that you can deactivate, allowing you to make animations of stairs going up and down. By deactivating it, you no longer have this ground level limit. In this case, with Hypersoft and a Kinect 2 alone, you do better than with a Rococo suit. Incidentally, this summer I'll be making a fairly substantial video to give you my feedback on my experience with IPI Soft and Rococo. Anyway, to get back to the stairs animations, you see that the steps don't match very well. The animations are there, but when they aren't retouched, the overall elevation of the character doesn't match reality. So we completely reworked all the stairs animations, even those from version 1.0. We took the basic BVH exported from the software. Sometimes I even had to go back to the software to clean up details that weren't cleanable in Blender. But above all, I made a real IK system in Blender. That is to say, I made a staircase that corresponds to the measurements of the staircase on which we took the captures to the nearest centimeter, and I put 2 IK per step, which allows to make sure that the foot correctly touches the steps of the staircase. There are still little things here and there that are not perfect, But that's the kind of thing that has its limits in 3D, especially when we talk about generic animation. I think that unless you're creating a very specific animation, if in your game you have stairs that are so many centimeters long, you'll have to create a specific animation for those centimeters. Or, for example, take my animations and redo the IKs to make them correspond to the correct distance of your stairs. That's also a possibility. Now, you should know that the stairs animations are also available in a loop version, both for the ascent and descent of stairs. For the most part, whether it's for the stairs or the others, they're each original loops made from the recording they correspond to. We've probably covered everything. If you have any other questions, feel free to leave a comment. I'll see you soon. Bye!